Welcome everyone after the short Easter break in our webinar program, and this is CGHE seminar number 201, and I think this is the 69th in the webinar format. And today we welcome Pham from Monash University, formerly my university, I might say, in Australia, where she works in the Faculty of Education and is going to talk to us today about international graduates and international student graduates and the labour market. But before I introduce Thanh, let me take you through the webinar protocols. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted online on the CGHE website within 48 hours or so, and you can watch it on YouTube for the rest of time. A transcript of the chat function also will be posted on the CGHE website. So your words there will be recorded. Now, please keep yourself muted during the webinar unless you've been asked to speak, or when you've got to the point where you're asking your question in the Q&A section of the webinar. There's no need to have your video on during the webinar. It does no harm, I think, if you do, but if everyone has their videos on at once, we may have problems. So we generally advise you to keep them off until you come into the Q&A section. We recommend using speaker view so you can more clearly see who is talking at any given time. Now, to ask a question, and we hope many questions will arise following Than's presentation, use the chat function, post your question there, and I'll select the Q&A participants on the basis of what's coming through. What that means is that you need to come in early to be guaranteed a voice in the Q&A. We find that some of our best questions come in the last 10 or even 5 minutes, and we can't bring them in, unfortunately. So post early and post often, and you're most likely to be received. When you do ask your question on camera, you unmute yourself, switch on your video, and you state your name and where you are from, and then make your statement, ask your question as you see fit. Now, it's a delight to welcome Pham to today's webinar. As I said, she's a senior lecturer at Monash University in Australia. Her interests are in higher education as a field of study, graduate employability, and internationalisation. And she's currently researching how international graduates in different contexts, including Australian and Asian countries like Japan, Vietnam, China, and Singapore, utilise resources obtained in the host country and further developed in the home countries to navigate labour markets. It's an issue of great interest to many people because there are so many international graduates that return, as well as some who stay in the country of education. And there's nearly not enough research on international employability, student employability. There's quite a lot of research in each country on graduate employability, issues related to domestic student populations, but up till recently anyway, international student graduates have fallen through the cracks a bit, and we're indebted to Than's offer to come on to the webinar today. She is going to help fill the gap in the research. Thanh, it's over to you.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you so much, Simon, for the very welcome introductions, and also thank you so much for being here with us, because I know you are still on leave. But I know that you already have proper leave. Yeah, so just would like to check with everybody, is you are seeing the slide and myself okay? Yeah, from your end? Okay,
yeah, we can see them.
Yeah. So good evening to everybody from Melbourne. Yes, it's evening, almost midnight in Melbourne. Thank you so much for coming here with me today. It is my great pleasure to be here to share with you my research about international graduates' employability. And as you can see, the title, Navigating the Labor Markets, International Graduates Need More Than Credentials. So here are 3 main points I will go through for tonight. First, I will discuss what we have known about research on international graduates' employability. And then I will discuss how my research has filled the gaps in the current literature. And then I will discuss implications for policies and practices. So what we have known about research on international graduates' employability. Now, so before talking about research in these areas, I just would like to share with you a couple of updates about international students in Australia, just in case you haven't known. So here are the statistics about the numbers of arrivals, international students in Australia between January 2020 and January 2021. And as you can see, in January 2021, we have only 360 students. I know it is very sad. And here is the difference in enrollments between 2019 and 2020. And as you can see, the early sectors, that means the English teaching sector, suffer the most. And then we follow higher education and the school sectors. And surprisingly, the vet sectors was not affected at all. And I think one of the reasons why the vet sector was not affected was because the vet sector in Australia has a small numbers of Chinese students, and early course and higher education has quite a large number of Chinese students in for their studies and enrollments. So that's a very brief about so what happened in Australia. Now let's move to the focus of our business today. So when we talk about international students' employability, so what we have known in the current literature is that we know quite a lot about, actually we have quite a lot of information about their employment outcomes. And if we look into the different research projects and look into the different studies and different surveys conducted during the last 10 years, we see quite a numbers reported, like actually we have different statistics, but the general picture is that international students have quite low employment outcomes. And here's an example, a larger scale survey conducted by my colleagues at Deakin University, Professor Legion. She said 37% of international graduates got full-time jobs in the field of study, and the rest was still doing full part-time and casuals, and actually still looking for the employment. And some others research and survey conducted by the Departments of the Education and the Departments of Home and Affairs. They reported unemployment rate of international graduates was quite high compared to what the national unemployment rate. So 10.6% compared to 5.7%. And here is a note, there was quite a number, almost like 30% of international graduates have to go back to their study. And like when international graduates go back to studies, actually many of them suffers unemployment. So I believe a large numbers of international graduates in this 30% actually could not find employment. So they decided to go back to study. So what we have known in the areas, in these areas about employability is that we haven't got enough information about their employability outcomes. So if you look into the current literatures, we have different definitions about employability. But the common feature shared by many researchers is that employability means employment obtainment, satisfactions and personal growth and sustainability. And I would like to emphasize sustainability here because I think it is very important in today's uncertain labor market. And more researchers are now arguing that migrants' post-study careers is not linear, but status and spatial. So we really need to look into their long-term employability trajectory so that we can inform universities and relevant stakeholders how to support not only for instant employment outcomes, but therefore long-term employability journey. But at the moment, unfortunately, we do not really look into the long-term employability. We only look at the short-term employment outcomes. So the consequence is that, for example, a report by OECD is saying that usually we know like 60 to 80% of international graduates say that they want to stay in the host country and they want to look for jobs in the host countries. But for the long terms, we only have around like 15 to 20%, and we actually do not have enough information to explain why. So that is the big gap in the current literature. Now, so regarding to the types of research in this area, what we have known is that we have quite a number of studies looking into the problems facing by international students and international graduates. And the common problems reported in these studies is that, so they look into the English proficiency and they reported limited work experiences, and they talk about employer stereotypes, etc. So those studies, they investigated impacts of the human capitals and external factors on the international graduates' employability. What we haven't known enough in this area is what kind of resources do international graduates possess, and how useful these resources, and how they use these resources for their work transitions and sustainability, and how do they strategize the resources, that means use agency to navigate the labor markets. I think it's very important for us to find the answers for these questions, because employability is determined by a range of factors like external and internal factors. But recently, more and more researchers arguing for the fact that because of the competitions, because of the severe competition in the labor market, individuals need to take more responsibilities in managing their career. But at the moment, we have not had enough information about how the individuals use their resources to navigate the labor market. Now, regarding the theoretical lenses in this field, what we have known quite a lot is quite a number of studies deployed what we call human capital theories. That means they look into the relationships between qualifications and one's career. So somehow they implicitly or explicitly use human capital to some extent. And we also have a large number of studies taking a deficit view. That means they see international students or international graduates as somebody who need to make changes and adaptation, or they are on inferior positions opposite to superior positions of local students. And I think one of the theories, I think a lot of people here already knows, is cultural theory. And cultural theories has been widely utilized in this space to investigate international students and international graduates. And some of the key points of this theory is that the theory emphasizes the reproductions of cultural capital, and it sees disadvantaged groups as having agency and gestures, but constrained within the structure systems due to limited power. And it ignores the subjectivities of individuals and various discourses that can shape one's decision-making in the bargaining process. What we have known enough in terms of theoretical lenses in this space is that we do not know about the utilizations of what we call critical and sociological perspectives. And I think some of the theoretical and conceptual concepts in this space, for example, self-formations developed by our Simon Martinson, and some other concepts about agencies like life cause agency or needs response agency or agency to be becoming. And recently I developed a new concept that is the agentic capital or sense capability approach or critical race theory. So to a great extent, I think these theoretical and conceptual concepts or theories share the same ideas that life, studies, and career of the peoples are not result only from humans, but also from other capitals like social, cultural identities, and psychological or the agentic, that means agency. So I just provided the background and some gaps in the current literatures about international graduates' employability. Now I would like to discuss how my research has filled some of these gaps, and then we will discuss the results of my research at the end of the presentation. Now, very quickly, during the last few years, what I have done is that I have done several research studies on employability negotiations of international graduates who stayed in Australia and also returned to their home countries like Vietnam, China, Singapore, and Japan. And depending on the projects, the sample size varies from like 30 for qualitative to 200 or more than 200 for mixed method. And the theoretical frameworks I have been using including the Portugal, Tomlinson graduate capital models or Martinson self formations or agentic capital. Now, regarding the outcomes, yes, I produce publications including the books and journal articles, but I think the outcomes that I am most satisfied with so far up to now is I use my research to develop 2 teaching units about employabilities in the Faculty of Education, Monash University, and I will share with you how I have done with these units when I share about my research in the following slides. So here are two books I developed, yes, and I published with my research collaborators and especially with some alumni in the first book. I invite you to have a look if you are interested in this field. Now, so regarding the findings of my research for the last few years, what I found is international graduates' employability was constrained by factors at different levels, including the macro, meso, and micro level. And the factors at the macros and meso level up to now, actually, when we look into the literature, we have quite a lot of information about these factors. For example, we know quite a lot about like how visa policies or visa schemes influence international students to stay or leave the host country, or like influence their career trajectories. And we also know about like stereotypes of the employers and recruiters in the host country. And we also know about how universities support internationals or local students for the employability or employment outcomes. So what we haven't known enough from what I got is that we do not really understand the factors at the micro level. So the factors at the micro levels become the focus of my research for the last few years. So when I investigate the factors at the micro levels, I look into capitals. So I look into the human, social, and psychological capitals. The reasons why I look into capitals because I was impressed by what Michael Tomlinson developed in his capital model. He said graduates' employability is constrained by at least 5 capitals: human, social, cultural, identities, and psychological capital. And in my recent book, I modified this model into something like this, because I added a new component that is authentic capital to connect all capitals together. And today I will share with you the findings of my research related to human capital and social capitals, and some aspects related to cultural capitals. We do not have time to talk about other 2 capitals, so I invite you to look into my research if you have an interest. Now let's talk about human capital. So before we talk about human capitals, I would like to make it clear for you. So when we talk about human capitals, human capitals has 2 components. The first one is qualifications, and the second one is the professional skills. So professional skill used to be called soft skills, but recently is in research about employability, it's replaced by professional skills. So for the studies I conducted in Australia and also in the home countries, I found qualification was still important, but qualifications were appreciated differently in different disciplines and in different contexts. So for the international graduates in Australia, they say the qualifications help them to obtain skill occupations, promotions, and also mobilize. That means quite a number of international graduates use qualifications to move to actually to change from one sector to another, or to move from one country to another country. And it's very interesting. I found some evidence about what we call nationally based protectionism. So it means there are some certain types of jobs that was only for local graduates, for example, lawyers or teaching at the early schooling level, because those jobs usually require local knowledge and also standard accent. So they are usually only for local graduates only. So for returnees, I found those returnees having degrees in high demand jobs area, for example, like IT, business, leadership, and management, they could find their jobs and obtain employment quite easily compared to with the people having qualifications in other disciplines. And I also found quite interesting the qualifications in the home countries appreciated differently. So for example, in Vietnam, if you got qualifications from US and UK, it usually is more favors compared with qualifications obtained in Australia. Now, regarding the professional skills, quite interesting in Australia and also in the home countries, all the graduates, majorities, and I say almost all graduates I work with, yes, they say the professional skills were very important for their career, But in Australia, the international graduates say that they suffer. They actually face a number of limitations in the professional skills, especially communication skills. For example, one said, I was shortlisted for several interviews, but failed all of them. When they look at my CV, they might have been impressed, but when we met for face-to-face interviews, they became aware of my English deficiencies. And for returnees, it was opposite. When I worked with returnees, I found almost all of them really appreciated the professional skills they learned in the host country. And actually, they use professional skills as something that make them look more advantage compared to with their local counterparts. So, for example, one returnee said, after going through several positions, I noticed what my supervisors and myself, I feel like more important is how you show yourself as a full-rounded person. You can work as a team and in a teams and in a community. So here are some of the findings from the surveys I conducted with returnees and also international graduates in Australia. You can see they gave quite low scores for specializations, but they gave very high score for the professional skills. And for international graduates, yes, very clearly, and I think it's very, very easy for people to see. They gave very high score for English proficiency, and again, low score for academic record, and again, very high score for professional skills. So what are implications based on the findings? We see the international education has been used as a tool for return on investment, and qualifications are still perceived as the only tools that enhance return on investment. So international students and parents are still, think about and focus on obtaining good academic record and tend to devalue the preparations of other resources, including professional skills. So how we help our international students to improve these situations? I think we need collaborations and support from different stakeholders. But for international students, clearly they need to rebalance academic performance and professional skills. And they also need to be guided to build professional skills as early as possible within and beyond the formal curriculum. For institutions, I think we need to develop better connections between the worlds inside and outside universities by using authentic teaching, learning, and assessment tasks. So now, what I've been doing in the teaching unit at Monash. So to rebalance the academic focus and professional skills, yes, I've been doing different things, but I think what I think I am most satisfied with is the ways I design assessment. So instead of using two big pieces of assessment at the middle and at the end of the semester, I designed a range of small assessment pieces through the semester. And these small pieces of assessment aim to assess oral, like different professional skills, including the oral presentations, written and self-reflection, and teamwork, etc. And I also ask my students to analyze job advertisements to see how what they are learning to respond to expectations of the recruiters and the industries, and how they need to improve on the ways they do their learning. So now I would like to share with you another research about communication skills, because communication skills is always a big thing when we talk about international students' employability. And it is also a big part of human capital. So this research I conducted to look into how international graduates develop strategies to navigate communication limitations. And what I found is when we talk about communication for employability, we need to look into two components. The first one is linguistic skills, and the second one is legitimate language. So for linguistic skills, actually we have quite a number of studies already exploring, how international students are limited in terms of English proficiencies, etc. For me, it is more important to talk about legitimate language because it is important, but we haven't paid enough attention to this component. So what it is the social capacity to use the linguistic capacity adequately in a determined situation. So for my studies, what I found is the participants share a sense of having difficulties in obtaining the right knowledge and the sensitivity to cultural differences to develop natural and smooth conversations in the workplace. And some fail to choose more talk to build working relationships, but not necessarily because of limited English proficiency, but because of the ways of doing things. For example, one told me is, yes, I don't know what I should talk about. They talk about walking the dog, surfing, and doing barbecues. Then they think my English is not good. So now, so for these studies, I am more interested in looking into not the problems, but the strategies that the participants develop to overcome the communication limitations. So what I found is the participants developed 3 types of strategies. The first one I call strategies to enhance expected communication skills. So the participants who use who develop these strategies, they use different ways to identify the preferences, values, and norms in daily practices and at the workplace. For example, one said, I learned from the marketing manager's Facebook, she had a dog and loved talking about her dog. So when I greeted her, I didn't simply say hi, but I extended the conversations by talking about her dog. So the more I talk about the dog, the more I learn tips for my work. That's very interesting. Now, so the second strategy is I call using ethnic capitals as navigation strategy. So for those participants who use these strategies, they was actively involved in self-analysis and use co-ethnic networks to find career pathways that match their communication competencies. And some avoided professions that require lots of direct oral communications and chose professions that require more expertise or specializations like finance, ITs, or research fellowships in academy. So when we look into the current literature, so actually we have some explanations from our previous researchers. So our previous researchers are saying that migrants' capital tends to be devalued, but in many cases, they could prevent these devaluations by seeking a space to use their capitals as an advantage. And these participants actually, they actively negotiated between their qualities and structural barriers to find opportunities that met their labor market personnel. Now, the last strategies I found for my participants, I call going beyond structural barriers as navigation strategy. So what I found from these participants was that they did not really make efforts to either enhance expected communication competency or use their ethnic capitals because they did not feel a need. For example, when I interviewed a group of women who follow their husband to Australia, some of them did 1 master, some did 2 masters, and a couple even did PhD. But for them, their career was not their priority. It was families, it was their children as their first priority. So they did not really make an effort to integrate in the mainstream society. And when I interviewed another group of graduates, and most of them were young, they treated Australia as a stopover destination for studies and temporary work. And they have planned to go to other countries like US and Europe. And for them, they did not see having stable life and good jobs means success for them. So some researchers, actually provided some background for us to understand these international graduates. For example, Rivi, he said, some international students, they are pulled between what we call cultural flexibilities on one hand and cultural uncertainties and confusions on the other hand. So they are uncertain, they are unsure how to go ahead, where to go and how to go ahead. And Martinson, yes, our Martinson, he say international students, they have the different types of resources, goals, and interests, and that can shape who they want to become. Or tolerance, he say employability cannot be separated from individual subjects and reduced to singular as abstract logics of an institutional or the economic model. So what are implications from this result? So now, when we talk about employability for communication for employability, we need to talk about a set of different competencies, including the linguistics and grammaticals and social cultures and strategic or agency. And we need to understand when international students have problems with communications, problems, usually the problems do not come from linguistic skills, but in many cases, because they are not familiar with what we call subtle codes. So it is about norms, it is about values, behaviors, and identities. So in teaching and learning, how we can help our international students to overcome the limitations. I understand it is like, an old story, but I think, the best way we can do it is we need to develop the authentic teaching and learning and assessment practices. And we need to teach communications in the real context as much as we can. And we need to be aware of the fact that creating comfortable context is crucially important. For example, when we conduct interviews or we work with international graduates with at the workplace, for me to create a comfortable context is even more important than teaching them how to enhance linguistic skills. And now it comes to challenge for online teaching and learning, because for online teaching and learning, like we are now, we don't really have the context. So what I got from one graduate share with me, he said, when I was offered an interview, they suggested to do online interviews, but I requested to have face-to-face interview because I often felt more nervous when talking online. I don't know, but when I met people, I saw their facial behaviors and I feel more comfortable. And this graduate actually, he got the job after going to the face-to-face interview. So I just share with you about human capital. So human capitals, including the qualification, professional skills, and communication skills and employability. Now I would like to share with you some more slides about social capital. I have to say that for all the research I have conducted so far, social capital emerged as a very important factor for employability. So here for an example for the international graduates in Australia, as you can see, 30% of them saying that they got their first job based on some forms of social networks. And for another study is conducted with returnees, yes, you can see 39%. Now, so when we look into the current literature, what we got so far, I think we have quite a number of the research already conducted about social networks, social capitals, and international and local studies and employment, employability, career, etc. So what I was more interested in is to look into the mechanisms of social networks and social capital, how social networks and social capital works. So what I found from my data analysis, I could see that social networks exist at 3 layers. So the first layers I call social networks. So social networks, those social networks developed by those people coming from the same or similar ethnic or linguistic and cultural and geographic backgrounds. And majorities of those networks are actually bonding ties. And the second layers I call network of professionals, and those networks are built by those people sharing a just or mutual interests or the same social class or religions. And those networks, the networks of professionals, they need sometimes sufficient time to build because those networks do not happen overnight. That means, within a short time. And the last layers I call selective and reciprocal relationships, and the networks and the connections developed at this layer. It takes a lot of times, a long time to build, and that's why I call the networks and the connections at these layers. It is like life mentors. And what I found interesting from those networks at these levels is reciprocal. That means that these networks is not like one-way connection or one-way relationship. Is about two-way. It's not from the mentor to the mentee, but also from the mentee to the mentor as well. So it's like two-way. So my argument is, it is not, the networks at the first layers was helpful for employability. It was the connections at layer number 2 and layer number 3 was helpful and useful for employability. So if I make a line like this, so what I found is those networks go into the first layer. they was not useful for employability. And if they were useful for employment outcomes, but not employability outcomes. So we need to guide our students. If we want them to develop employability, not employment, we need to guide them to go from layer number 2 to layer number 2, number 1 to layer number 2 and layer number 3. So what we learn from here? So we, as I said, we have quite a number of studies talking about social networks and social capital, but we still know very little about differences between different types of social networks. And for me, social capitals are deeper layers of deeper levels of social networks. And it takes longer time to be built, and it often builds on just and mutual interests. So for teaching and learning, so what can we do? Yes, so to help our students, I think we need to create opportunities for students to have sufficient time to build just and mutual interests, especially to build those things with industries on internships or placement. And we need to guide our students to develop career goals so that they could have enough time to seek and build social capital. And it is very important for returnees to keep connections with their home country. So what I've been doing regarding social capital, social networks for my teachings at Monash. So I've been doing different things. For example, I asked my students to reflect on the type of social networks they've been developing, and analyze what kind of advantages and disadvantages of these type of social networks. And I have to share with you, it's a lot of fun. And I asked them to self-analyze, how and what contributes to navigate, to the negative and positive relationships with mentors and colleagues when they work on internships, and how to improve those connections in the future. And I also asked them to create a LinkedIn account to seek and connect with people and organizations in their fields of occupations. So now, so the last thing is about authentic capitals. As I said, in my research for the last few years in general, I was more interested in looking into the strategies that international graduates use to navigate the labor market. I'm not interested in looking into problems, because I think a lot of research already talking about problems. So I developed the new concept that is authentic capital. And what I defined is, it is the capacity to develop strategies to use various forms of capital effectively and strategically, depending on one's ethnic background, areas, expertise, career plans, context, and personal qualities. So I leave it here. And if you want to know more about authentic capitals, again, I invite you to look into my publications, and hopefully you'll find something interesting there. So now I end my presentation with something positive. Yes, we talk about problems, we talk about low employment, etc. Now we end with something positive about Australia. So here's an article on the conversations. They say in November 2020, the visa approvals in Australia dropped 62%, but then it said there are still a significant numbers of applications and approvals. And then it said Australia is still, an attractive place for international students. Yeah, so if you have a plan and if you want to come to Australia, so I think it's still worthwhile coming here. Yeah, so thank you so much for coming here and listening to my presentations. And now so I'm very happy to take any questions if we have. Yeah, thank you.
And thank you too, Thanh. That was really interesting. And let me open the discussion by asking you a little bit about this balance between, academic performance and professional skills, that sort of practical question that everyone faces in the curriculum now, I think. I mean, most academics are going to push back and say curriculum's already crowded. If we teach professional skills as part of the curriculum, that's going to mean we're going to dumb down the content. I mean, a lot of those problems can be got around, I think, by better organisation of the work, and sometimes by auxiliary teaching methods such as skill provision. But I think the harder question for universities is this. I mean, to what extent do we conceive professional skills as generic, like communication skills, preparing a resume and so on? And to what extent do we think that those professional skills have to be nested in the field of study or the occupational training that's involved? I mean, in other words, to what extent can you provide this professional skill training by generic university services, and to what extent does it have to be nested in the specific skills of the academics teaching the program in detail.
Thank you so much, Simon. I think that is very big and very interesting questions. And I think to improve the professional skills, we need to embed in the formal teaching and learning. Because when we ask students to do something like extras, like, we ask them to go to career services, I believe, so like 1% of them is going to those services because we ask them to do extras, and that means we still assess them based on academic performance. So, they always make excuse being busy, etc. So if we want to improve professional skills, we really need to embed in the formal teaching and learning. And I think in Australia, actually, we've been doing those things for the last 10 years. For example, like in all courses, teaching units we've been doing, we have to demonstrate like how our teaching units help our students to improve like communication. So communication is a big part in our teaching. And now we need to also demonstrate like teamwork. For example, when I design assessments, I need to demonstrate to the faculty. So what kind of activity and assessment help my students to improve the teamwork skills and also critical thinking. But then again, those things we've been doing, but I think not enough. And I talked to some colleagues in the career services. They say, yes, like we have fantastic resources, etc. And we invite international students and local students to come, but the reality is they very few come once and never come back, and many is they never come. Yeah, so hopefully I answer your question, Simon.
Thanks, you did, and of course it's another presentation, isn't it? To do justice to that. Now I'd like to bring in. We've had a lot of interest in your webinar. More than 100 people have been tuning in, which is tremendous. It's a good crowd for us. Let me bring in Jason Jung at this point for her question.
Yeah, thank you, Simon, and thank you, Thanh. It was a great presentation. Where I learned a lot about this employability of the international student. I was wondering whether your findings are mostly from these undergraduate international students, or whether these findings are also applicable to the postgraduate students, like master's students. I'm asking this because the majority of international students are more in this postgraduate level, like masters. And I think it's something also related to the Simon's question, because these postgraduate programs, they are supposed to enhance their professional or like discipline specific knowledge, but at the same time, more and more, they are also asked to enhance their genetic skills for the employment and also labor market. So I was wondering if you found something differences or similarities between undergraduate degree holders or postgraduate degree holders. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jason. And hello. So we've been working.
Hi. Emails. Yes. Thank you.
Now
Good to see you.
At least virtually. Yes. Nice to meet you,
Yes.
Jason. That is a very interesting question, Jason. And actually, that is something I plan to do next. So,
okay.
So what I did for my studies, I have the international students from the different levels. Because so I want to see like the big picture first, and then I will to zoom in like a small cohorts, different cohorts later. So from what I remember, I have around like like 50-50. So like 50% undergraduates and 50% for postgraduates. And you are right, international students, many of them come from master's levels, and I have a number of PhD students. But my research, I did not really focus. I did not intend to focus on the PhD students. So I got like a small number of PhD students, but not many. So mainly about undergraduates and master, because I really want to know like, international students, when they come to Australia, they only, like lock themselves inside their rooms to do research. How they use, the space outside universities and enhance, like professional skills, and they understand kind of like the big pictures outside. So that's why I kind of like excluded PhD students. But thank you so much for asking those questions. I think when I have the future research, I will definitely keep you updated.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you, Jason.
Thank you, Thanh. Yeah.
Tan. Can I bring in Gabriel Alfaro at this point?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Professor Pham. I really enjoyed your talk. And, you know, I'm coming from the perspective, I'm a PhD student in Madrid, Spain. And I'm really fascinated by your term agentic capital. And, and I'm conducting my study similarly. I mean, not too different from yours, but I'm focusing more on the regional mobility here within the European Union. And it's fascinating to me about the Australia example. And I'm really disappointed to hear about the lower enrollments in international students, where I think Australia, can benefit or an opportunity being in the Asian sphere, being an American citizen working in Europe is interesting to me because I wish more Americans studied abroad and, you know, learning about the European mobility programs such as Erasmus has been very humbling. And so seeing other regional mobility programs and seeing international students struggle, again, is a little disappointing, but at the same time, promising for the future as far as our work is concerned. Would you apply agentic capital to not just international students, but just to mobility students in general, like short-term, short cycle, you know, 1 year or 1 semester, for example? Would you apply that?
Thank you so much, Gab, for the very interesting questions and also what you shared about your background. Yes, hope one day I will reach your PhD thesis. Yes, very soon. Yes, hope very soon. To keep me updated. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for the questions about agentic capitals because it is my great passion actually. And unfortunately, at the moment, you know, it is still at the early stage for me to develop that concept. And at the moment, I mainly use agentic capital for international students only. I also apply this concept for local students in the one of the book I showed you just before. So if you have a chance, look into the one chapters in chapter 13 of the first book on the slide I shared before. So you see some of the ideas about agentic capital for local students. But that in that chapters I talk about agentic capitals for local and international students in terms of like they did their studies, they graduated and they navigated the labor market here in Australia. I haven't got any chance to apply that concept to like, you know, some mobility students like in terms of short terms and long term or short term. But thank you so much for the questions. I think that's something very interesting and I understand so mobility is something very interesting and agency can help, you know, students when they do, you know, mobile, you know, mobilize from one place to another place very clearly. But unfortunately, I haven't had any chance to, you know, to talk about this. If you apply that concept in your research, I would love to read your research one day. Yes, so do it and keep me updated.
Thanks, Tan, and thanks, Gabrielle. Can we bring in Victorita Triff?
Hi, thank you, Simon. Congratulations, Tan. I read your chapter titled Employability, Capital and Career Development. The issue of relationship between employability or job success and the skills as communication, social skills, teamwork, problem solving and collaboration is very important. How to developing skills as communication or collaboration to graduates in times of turbulent environment? Thank you.
I am so sorry if you I apologize. Can you please like repeat the questions? Yes, I got the first part, but the second question mark I couldn't get it yet. Yeah, just so sorry. Yes, maybe because of the internet was not good from my end. Yeah.
I regret. I repeat for you, please.
Yeah.
How to developing skills as communication or collaboration to graduates in times of extreme crisis or turbulent environment?
Yes, that's very, very interesting questions. And now to develop collaborations and communications as collaborations as communications in extreme. Can you say it again? The extremes environment. That's what you meant.
Is your sentence in this chapter?
I
You use
couldn't understand what I wrote. Can someone, can you come in? Simon, can you help me?
I think the question is about how we, we're sort of shifting the focus away from individual graduate attributes alone and looking at not only employability as a sort of ongoing concern, but the larger social and economic and cultural environment and how that's very volatile and unstable. And, there are major crises coming on in some countries more than others, perhaps, but everyone shares an ecological problem and so on. So, and politics is unstable. So, does that change what you might think about when you talk about agential capitals or graduate attributes? I mean, does that change add to our tasks in some way?
Yes, thank you so much, Simon. And yes, I got the idea now. So you elaborated what I wrote in a much more beautiful way. Yes, so I think now, so talking about the big pictures, for example, at the moment, we are facing something we call, for example, like nationalism, they happened in US and, in many countries, like even like Europe and Australia, we started talking about those things. So of course, those things affects, how do we teach our students, for example, communication collaborations. If we talk about, like individualisms and nationalisms, and we teach our students collaborations, it's quite tricky things. But so far at this stage, I could see it, at least in Australia and at Monash, those things actually I haven't seen having any impact on teaching and learning. So maybe it is about, like maybe it's only in politics and, like in the society in the big picture. But from what I've seen from, at least from my experience, from my teaching with my students, I haven't seen any, anything, related to how students go against what, what we are teaching and what happened recently, because maybe it's like this phenomenon just recent, but I don't know in the future. So I'd leave it there, so for like people with bigger ideas, to maybe help answer that question. So hopefully, Chief, you happy with what I say, or Simon, if you can help me to, to elaborate.
Thank you very much.
We need to move down the question list, but I mean, these, webinars lend themselves to big picture questions after detailed, more specific papers have been given. That's what tends to happen. People come back with these big picture questions and shift the focus. So it's a sort of one of the good things, also one of the problems about the webinar format. We only have 20 minutes to deal with these things. Now, let me quickly then pass on to Subin Sisabath, who has the next question. Subin.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Trant. And I have followed your research for many, and then now I am the doctoral student in Japan. Yeah. And actually, I agree with you in terms of the communication, but I think most of the research has been done is that those international students from the English country, so when they're back to the home country, they tend to be more kind of competitive. But have you have a chance to study or compare for those who come back from the non-English speaking countries, how they encounter in terms of communication or the cultural in their home country? And that's it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sorry. And what do you think about the to compare with the local student? Because so far, I think the research tend to more focus only the international student, but no comparative in terms of the local student to make it clear cut whether that international education do affect their employability or not when they graduate.
Thank you so much, Subin. And first, thank you for following my research. Yes, it is a nice surprise for me. Regarding your questions, yes, unfortunately, I have to say no. haven't had any chance to to compare for those of coming back from English-speaking countries and non-English-speaking country, and I think that is very important. For the second questions, comparing between international students and local students, in my research, I haven't got any official publications about the differences between international graduates and local graduates. But I am having one manuscript about social capitals between local students and international students. And hopefully that papers will be published next year. And if you, if I know, remembers, you know, your contacts, I will send it to you. So just briefly, so what I found in that papers was for international students in terms of developed social capitals or social networks, they suffer a lot from cultural capital. So they develop social capitals, but the factors that stop them to develop meaningful and you know, like fruitful social capitals is the limitations in cultural capital. Because like what I said in my presentation today, they did not have enough understanding about subtle codes like the norms and, you know, preferences. So they could not join, you know, conversations, or they could not join, you know, kind of like daily small talks. So those things stop them from develop meaningful and rich social capital. So that's what I remembered from that paper. Yeah, hope I answer some of the things you asked. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
that's very good. Colleagues, we'll have to move on. Thank you, Subin. That was a good question and a good answer, I think. Yushu Kai now.
Hello. Thank you, Simon, for giving me a chance to raise a question. So I'm Yuzhuo Cai from Tampere University, Finland. So thank you, Thanh, for your wonderful speech. Very stimulating. Me too, you know, I have been following your research. I really like, you know, your approach of understanding the individual role of students, creating the concept of agentic capital. My question is very specific, given the time. So that is about your categorization of the three social networks. I like that too very much, but I want to ask you to reflect how this categorization is related to Granovetter's concept of weak ties, because, you know, in the 1970s, he wrote a book about how students may get a job benefiting from the weak ties. I think this is quite relevant. So if you have time, I would like to hear how you consider students may leverage their different kind of capitals in developing the needed social network.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Yu Trout. Yes, if I pronounced your name correctly,
yes,
and
forgive
me if it is not correct. Thank you so much for knowing about my research and also to your questions. I think it's interesting. I think all the questions today for me is very interesting, and honestly, it's very meaningful. And actually, you guide me to think about my research in the future. Unfortunately, I haven't had chance to read the book you just talked about. So if you don't mind, can you drop me an email and the name of the book as well? Yes, and I think I have to communicate with you after I read the books, because I haven't read and I dare not to answer. Otherwise, I will go to the wrong directions. So is it okay? Yeah. So
yeah, sure. I will communicate with you by email. So sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and apologize. Yeah.
No, it's a good question, that one, and worth following up that discussion, I think. Thanks, Yusuf. That was really useful. The next question is from Hongwei Gu.
Thank you, Ms. Pham, for this informative presentation. I note that international students are facing challenges getting into the labor market today because of COVID and because of the recovery. So I would like to ask, do you think that there's a skills gap facing international students in Australia today? Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for the questions, Hong Wei. Yes, and I noticed you attended this series very often, like almost every webinar I see you. Yeah, so yeah, thank you. Yeah, I noticed who attended. Yeah, yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think regarding talking about skills, international students have a lot of gaps in skills, professional skills. And as I said, the most significant is communication skill. So I just want to maybe answer your questions or expand your questions a little bit. For me, in the context of COVID-19, when we do the online, there are both pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages for international students. Advantages is that when we look into statistics, we see an increasing numbers of international students now actually going back to their home countries immediately after they finish their studies or after they stayed in the host countries for a while. And they plan to develop their careers in their home country. So from my research, as you can see, human capital, I mean, qualification is just one of the many factors. It is more about professional skills. It is more about cultural understanding. It is about Huanxi, yes, in Chinese. That means the connections, social networks, etc. Those things are important. So imagine if they do their studies in their home countries, actually they have better chance to develop and enrich this capital. And actually in two of the publications, I talk about returnees. I talk about how returnees was disadvantaged in the home labor market because they did not have those capitals. So that is the advantage for the, international students if they develop their careers in the home country. The disadvantage is if they plan to develop their careers in the host countries, of course, they disadvantage in terms of, you know, the limited opportunities to develop their communication, limited opportunities to enrich their cultural capitals. Yeah, so you know, so I see both pros and cons in the context of the COVID in terms of the international students' employability. So hopefully, what I say answers your questions. Yeah.
Our final question will be from So-Young Lee. So-Young.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, my question, I'll be really quick. So what is your standpoint about the aim of higher education? Should it improve agential capital alongside other capitals? And how can having a set of capitals to be built during higher education be linked to agential self-formation? And if I understand correctly, the conceptualization of agency in your study is agential capital is the using the other capitals as a strategies to overcome these limitations and difficulties of international students. It is also assuming the student international students deficit.
Yeah, thank you so much, So-Young. Yes, again, I see you in every webinars in this series. Yeah, yes, very committed to the seminars. Yes, thank you so much. Now, if I could answer, I would say, you know, the higher education should impact all of these capitals because all of them are important. Yes, and I think we have to do the differently for like, you know, in different areas in terms of teaching, learning, and assessment to incorporate and help our students to enrich and develop these capitals as much as we can, because none of them is not important. All of them is important. And for me, you know, because today we do not have time to talk more, but if you have chance, I invite you to look into my publications. Again, for international students, in international graduates, you know, for me, to up to this point, based on what I saw from my research, the most significant for them to enter and survive in the labor market is not about English proficiency. It's about cultural capital. Because again, I found cultural capitals can determine how people communicate. For example, here, if I know you, you know me, and that means we know the context, we know the cultural capital, so we can communicate very fluently. But if I don't know you, you don't know me, no matter how much you are good at English, you have problems with speaking. So when I researched with international students, you know, after, you know, I interviewed and we looked into the data, so what I found, you know, it is not about their English proficiency, because to be honest with you, when they stayed in the host country for a number of of years completing their degrees and stayed after they graduated. Their English proficiency is quite okay, but it is about how to create a comfortable context for them and how they know about the context that help them to communicate. So if I need to choose one, I would say higher education needs to work more about enriching cultural capital. Just behind, like human capital, because they still need qualifications. That is tick the box. Yeah. Does that make sense? Mm.
Yeah, well, congratulations, Thanh. I mean, you've been really successful, I think, in putting forward a theoretical framework and explaining it well, and everyone's got engaged with it, which has been very significant. And the chat and it shows that people are really interested in what you're saying. I found the social networks concept, the three-way concept, and the idea of agential capital, of course, my work. I mean, I'm interested in that. As really useful. And I think in general, you show the power of theory to illuminate the empirical, which is really good. At the same time, I want to express some concern and skepticism about the way in which we're multiplying concepts of capital as a way of dealing with everything. I mean, this begins with Bourdieu, of course, but the danger is we get into a way of thinking where all social attributes, relational attributes, become described exhaustively as individualizable capitals possessed by people who carry them around in the manner of human capital. And I think that to some extent reproduces some of the downsides of human capital theory. It's high individualization. And we also need to think about how we express collective outcomes that are shared, that are relational in that sense, and not necessarily attributable to individuals or measurable or observable in terms of individuals alone. I mean, especially if we use the Bourdieu idea that capitals are interchangeable and you can turn one into another in terms of value, and in some way they can all be combined as a valuation, in which case we're sort of getting right back into positivist sort of notions and of educational outcomes. So I do think we need to find a way of balancing this talk about individualizable capitals with a discussion about joint collective relational outcomes as well, which won't be sufficiently contained by purely individual outcomes of graduates. Anyway, that's another discussion. We're talking about collective public goods in some of the other work that we're doing in our centre at the moment. So we'll take that further. But I really think that your presentation today was good and engaging, and hopefully we'll have you back on the show to talk further about your work, and particularly about the way you're handling agency, which I think is what excites a lot of us. Thanks very much, Thanh. Our next webinar, as you all will have seen from Trevor's notice, is Still Unwieldy, Male, Pale and Stale, Isomorphic Influences on English University Governing Bodies, with Alison Wheaton, who's winding up her doctoral work on governance in English higher education. So we look forward to seeing you for that webinar next Tuesday. Thanks again, Thanh, and bye to everyone for now.
Thank you so much, everybody. Yes, good night from Melbourne. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, bye-bye.